Hello everyone, welcome to Word of Hope, taking a look at the lessons for this coming Sunday, the 7th Sunday after Easter, from the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. Let's jump right into it. So Jesus has ascended into heaven. They walk back to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. They go to a room upstairs. This is Acts chapter 1, verse 13. So tradition has it that this is the same room where they celebrated the Passover. This is the same room where the disciples met on Easter Sunday behind locked doors. It's the same place that they met the second Sunday after Easter behind locked doors when Thomas was with them. So there's this tradition being established that they are meeting in a specific place, in a specific venue. And really from that comes the whole tradition of God's people gathering on Sundays. They met on Sundays, the ancients did. Going all the way back to the disciples, they met on Sunday because that is the day the Lord was resurrected. So the disciples are named. A couple of things to note. Peter, John, James, and Andrew, Philip, and Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, son of James. So this is the same list that we see in Matthew 10, in Mark 3, and in Luke 6. In all of these listings, there are some nuances that repeat. Peter, John, and James are always mentioned first, and Peter is always the first one to be mentioned. Also interesting, Simon the Zealot. Whenever Simon is mentioned, this isn't Simon Peter, this is Simon the Zealot. There's always that tag listed there, Simon the Zealot. The Zealots, this is interesting, the Zealots were a political movement whose express purpose was to overthrow the Roman government. So I think it's just so striking to see this wide range of individuals that Jesus selects. So Simon the Zealot is one of the disciples, and another one of the disciples is Matthew. What was Matthew's profession? Matthew was a tax collector. So Matthew worked, we would say today, worked for the federal government. And Simon the Zealot belongs to a political party whose express purpose it is to overthrow the Roman government. So I think this underscores a thought that the church is to be apolitical, that politics should not enter the church. This is my personal belief. Politics should not enter the church, but the simple message of sin and grace and redemption and hope and consolation, that ultimately is the purpose of the church. Matthew 28, 19, and 20, to preach, teach, baptize, and bring people to Christ. Verse 14, in addition to the disciples, there's mentioned the women, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. So the women, well, we know about Salome, we know of Mary Magdalene. So these women were very prominent in the ministry of Jesus. They supported Jesus in the ministry. They supported the disciples as they traversed along with Jesus Galilee and Judea and Samaria. So they supported Jesus financially. Interesting as well that Mary is highlighted. Mary, the mother of Jesus, a very prominent person. Also, what is mentioned is Jesus' brothers. A couple of references to the brothers of Jesus. John 7:5, we're told that the brothers of Jesus, or the siblings of Jesus, did not believe in him. Mark chapter 3, 21 through 25, we're told that the brothers of Jesus thought he was out of his mind. They were so unwilling to believe in who he was and what he had to offer. They, of course, had a change of heart. We're told from Paul, one of Paul's letters, that Jesus specifically appears to James. This is James, the half-brother. It would have been another one of their children, and he in turn becomes leader of the church of Jerusalem. So Peter stands up into a group called 120 and details the fulfillment and the need for Jesus to complete his earthly ministry. And the reason they're gathering here is to replace Judas. What happens to Judas? Well, he took his life because he handed Jesus over, because he betrayed Jesus. Interesting to note, both Judas and Peter had earth-shattering, faith-shaking moments. The only difference between Judas and Peter is that Peter knew where to go for help and comfort, that is Christ, and Judas did not or refused to. At any rate, Peter in verse 20, Acts chapter 1, verse 20, quotes a couple of Psalms. He quotes Psalm 69, verse 25, and then he quotes Psalm 109, verse 8. These passages from the Old Testament, the book of Psalms, detail the fulfillment that one of Jesus' disciples would forsake him, betray him. So it's so interesting, isn't it, that there's so many prophecies in the Old Testament that detail Jesus' birth, his life, his death, his ministry, his miracles, the scope of his ministry. And there's even prophecies detailing that there would be one of his disciples that would reject him. So they say, we need a replacement. We need a replacement for Judas. Here are the parameters. It is important that it would be a man who was with us the whole time. So at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, verse 22, beginning with John's baptism, to the time that he was taken from us. So there's two people that fall in this category. Joseph, called Barsabas, also known as Justus, and Matthias. They prayed and they say, show us which one. They cast lots, and the lot fell to Matthias. Couple of things of note there. First of all, they prayed. Prayer was such a vital and intricate role in the early Christian church, specifically as detailed in the Gospels and in the book of Acts. They're always praying. When they need direction, they're praying. When they're confused, they're praying. When they're frazzled, they're praying. When they are distraught, they're praying. And that's a beautiful template or encouragement for us as we deal with our own trials and difficulties. Prayer is the means by which our heart can be stilled and our lives strengthened. They choose Matthias to take over the apostolic ministry. An apostle is different from a disciple. An apostle comes from two Greek words, apostello, sent out. So an apostle was one personally sent out by Jesus. So we talk about the 12 apostles, then we talk about Matthias being chosen, and then, of course, Paul makes the claim, and the book of Acts details for us how he is the last of the apostles, the one personally chosen by God. It's interesting, too, to note that the importance of choosing a replacement, and also of significance that the women were involved in choosing it. So it's not just sometimes you might think back to our history, our Bible history books, and think of that it's just the 11 that are choosing. No, it's all 120. Of that, men and women, of which 11 were certainly a vital part, but it's this group of believers numbering 120 that choose the replacement. They cast lots. What does that mean? It actually goes back to the Old Testament. The high priest had a plate with 12 stones on it, a gold plate with 12 stones on it. Each of the stones represented one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And in it, we don't know exactly how it was, but in it there was this little pouch, and there were two stones, the Urim and the Thummim. And this was used by the priests in the Old Testament to find out which plan God wanted them to use. So it was kind of like, should we do this one or should we go this route? So when the concept of casting lots is used, the concept would have been two stones most likely put into a basin and then tipped upside down, and then the first one that would come out would be the one that was chosen. If you kind of think of it in terms of an old-fashioned piggy bank, you put the coins in there and then you shake it upside down, and then eventually one of the coins will come out. So that's the means they used to choose Judas's replacement. From there we go to 1 John chapter 5, verses 9 through 15. John here contrasts or talks about testimony, and with that he contrasts human testimony and God's testimony. Human testimony is testimony that is based on humans. God's testimony is based on Jesus. When we believe in God's testimony, we will accept Jesus Christ as the Son of God. We will accept him for who he is, and we will believe on him. Verse 11, this is the testimony: God has given us eternal life, and this life is his Son. So as we center our lives upon Jesus Christ, when we want to know what God is all about, when we want to know what God stands for, when we want to know God's personality, we look to Jesus in the Gospels, and as his ministry and life and the implications of it is detailed in the rest of the epistles, we gain entrance into the mind of God. Verse 14, this is the confidence we have in approaching God. If we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. So when we ask God for specific things, God will grant them. Now, it's important to note that sometimes God says yes, sometimes God says no. God hears and answers all prayers. Sometimes he gives them according to our wishes and desires. Sometimes he gives them according to his. But God always hears our prayer. Prayer is a means by which our hearts can be settled and strengthened as we pour out our heart to God. God already knows what we need. God already knows what we're going to ask. But the act of prayer is a means by which our heart can be stilled as we pour out our requests to him. From there we go to the Gospel of St. John, the 17th chapter. Chapter 14 through 17 is the dialogue of Jesus as he walks from the upper room to the Garden of Gethsemane. And specifically, chapter 17 is called Jesus' high priestly prayer. I'm going to talk about this in the sermon for this coming Sunday. In the Old Testament, how the priest would pray for God's people, so Jesus, as our high priest, prays for you and for me. And he makes a couple of wonderful claims that we can take to heart. Acts chapter 17, chapter 12, he protects them. I kept them safe by that name that you gave me. So we have this comfort of knowing that God protects us too. Sometimes when we think of protection, we think of no harm ever coming upon us. And while that is a true description of protection, sometimes protection also shows itself in knowing that God's plan and his purpose for us might be beyond our control. So even when there's calamity, trials, difficulties that beset us, it's not that God isn't protecting us. is that God is at times allowing these trials and tribulations to come into our lives so that through them and in them our faith might be purified. Jesus says, I'm coming that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I love that phrase. Jesus says, I want my disciples to have the full measure of joy. Such a powerful phrase when you just kind of stop and think about it, the full measure of joy. So I've said this before, one of the greatest marks of a Christian is a mark of joyfulness. Joyfulness in what God has done. Joyfulness in the blessings he gives us. Joyfulness in the beauty, wonder, and majesty of God's created world. And of course, joyfulness that comes from knowing that my sins are forgiven, that your sins are forgiven as well. So Jesus says, I want my disciples to be filled with joyfulness. Isn't that a wonderful exhortation? Verse 15, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. Who of us has not prayed, Lord, I'm ready now, or Lord, change this situation in the world, alter this situation in the world, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would do it now. Jesus says, that's not the way I work. If I were to just take you out of the world, yes, eternity would be wonderful, but our time on earth is to our benefit, is to the glory of others, that by us others might see God's plan and God's purpose, and also the light and life and joy of Christ shining in us. Verse 17, sanctify them by truth. Your word is truth. Jesus exhorts us that we would be sanctified by the truth of who he is. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That our heart and our minds and our lives would be made holy by that truth, ultimately, as his word is revealed to us. These are the lessons. Have a wonderful, Christ-filled, God-inspired week, and I'll see you next time.